Thank you for tuning in to the Keeping It Real with KC podcast, a no judgment zone podcast that covers lifestyle, entertainment, news, and sports. Even though KC doesn't watch sports, but these are minor details. By the way, he reads tarot cards too. Yes, I really mean it. He reads tarot cards too. And now, the host you've tuned in for, KC Phoenix.
Welcome back to the Keeping It Real with KC podcast. I, of course, am your host, KC Phoenix. And, woo, boy. I tell you, this is just getting crazier and crazier with the things that are happening. And I'm talking about this particular cruise line, which is actually a cruise line I always wanted to take. For those who don't know, in my previous life, I used to work for Royal Caribbean and Celebrity Cruises many years ago. Actually, it's almost 20 years ago, actually. How the time flies by. And let me tell you, this particular cruise line was always one of my favorites that I'm about to discuss. That's why this story is it's kind of sad, but it's kind of funny at the same time with the whole situation, because I really respect this cruise line, and I have to talk about this. But before we get into that, KIRWKC.com, main podcasting platform. This podcast is carried on Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Overcast, Bullhorn, Amazon Music, Audible, and several other podcasting platforms. Please feel free to listen to this podcast on whatever platform is most convenient for you. KIRWKC on all the social media platforms. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about it. So, Miami judge issues cruise ship seizure over unpaid bills. Crystal Cruises, a luxury cruise line. And just let me tell you something about Crystal Cruises. When I first heard about Crystal Cruises and when I gained respect for them, is when I heard about them doing the maiden voyage of one of their ships. And this was a long time ago. It might have even been the Symphony. I forgot which one it was, because at that time I think they only had 3 ships. I think the Symphony, the Serenity, and something else. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it was only like 3 ships at the time Crystal Cruises had. And this is luxury. And what had happened is the maiden voyage happened, but it did not meet Crystal Cruises standards. So because it did not meet their standards, where let's say the carpet wasn't done correctly, or something was wrong with the chandelier, or this or that, it's things that where other people would be like, this really isn't that big of a deal. To them, it was a big deal because they're selling a brand, and their brand is luxury, and they want everything to be as close to perfect as possible, even though ideally, in the real world, nothing is ever truly perfect. But due to there being issues with all of that stuff, they issued refunds to everybody on the ship. And the tickets were anywhere from $9,000 per person to about, I think it was like $32,000 per person. They issued refunds for everybody because they're like, it doesn't meet our standards. So we're just giving everybody a refund. When I found that out, I was like, oh, okay. I like them. But yeah, so Crystal Cruises is one of the luxury cruise lines. Silver Sea is another one. Seabourn is another one, even though Seabourn ships are a little bit smaller, which they're owned, if I'm not mistaken, by Carnival Cruises. People don't know this. Even though Carnival Cruises is I'm not even going to go there. Let me take that and put it to the side. Regardless, some people don't know Carnival Cruises owns a lot of cruise lines. owns. You'd be surprised how many cruise lines Carnival Cruises owns. They own a lot of them. So I'm just throwing that out there. From all walks, all types of ships. But I digress. Let me get to this article. A luxury cruise line, Crystal Cruises, is in hot water after not paying fuel bills. A Miami judge issued a warrant that gives authorities the ability to seize the Crystal Symphony ship on U.S. waters. The warrant comes days after Crystal Cruises suspended all sailings following a bankruptcy filing by its owner, Genting Hong Kong. The Crystal Symphony ship left Miami on January the 8th for a trip through the Bahamas and was due back in South Florida on January 22nd. The ship is instead currently docked in Bimini, the closest Caribbean island to the U.S. coast. We were told that the reason we weren't going to Miami, the heat just came on if you're wondering what came on in the background. We were told that the reason we weren't going to Miami was because there was a warrant out for the arrest. Elio Pace, an entertainer on the ship, said. I honestly thought it was a joke. I mean, it's like a movie. You can't make that up. Medina, a vendor aboard the Crystal Symphony, said that passengers were being transported via ferry on a 2-hour ride back to Fort Lauderdale and then by shuttle to Miami on Sunday. We know that today's transfer to Port Everglades via ferry was uncomfortable due to inclement weather, Crystal Cruises said in a statement. This end to the cruise was not the conclusion to our guest vacation we originally planned for. You think? Crystal Cruises says they can't comment on pending legal matters. Medina says Sunday she was still aboard the ship in isolation. She says she needs to be isolated for 10 days before she is able to get off. Everything is okay, said Medina in a Spanish language interview with NBC 6 Telemundo 51. We're just waiting to see what happens. According to Medina, there are no passengers on board, and the only people left on the ship are crew members and vendors like herself. The company is going to take care of getting all the crew members back home, said Medina. Obviously, they're going to do it little by little, but the company is buying tickets to get each of the crew members back to their respective countries. That's another thing. Some people don't know this, but a lot of people on cruise ships are not from, like, especially if you're sailing out of the U.S., they're not from the U.S. They're usually from other countries, and it's pretty cool. I was on the Celebrity Constellation. It was so crazy. It was right before I moved to Los Angeles because I lived in Miami. And my last 2 weeks at my job, I was on because I worked at the corporate headquarters because I was a guest vacation specialist. And they needed someone to work during Christmas and New Year's. And no one was really volunteering. So someone came to me and asked me like, hey, would you be willing to go on the ship and book, do the book, because they needed someone to book the bookings, because when guests are on the ship, you want them to book again for the next cruise. And that's what I had to do. And they came to me and asked me, hey, would you be willing to go on the ship? It sails out of Puerto Rico, the Constellation, for 2 weeks. So you'll be on the ship for 2 weeks, blah, 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 for Christmas and New Year's. And I was like, well, I'm not sure. Let me call my parents and see. So I called my mother, and my mother was like, you better get on that ship. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool. And I felt bad because I was working part-time at Banana Republic over in South Beach, because I lived in South Beach. And which one of my favorite jobs to this day. I loved working at Banana Republic. And I had told Jason that I would work during that time because I had extra time available. So he had put me on the schedule for all of this time before Royal Caribbean offered for me to go on the whole 2 week thing. And then when they offered, I was like, and I'm weighing it back and forth because I'm like, I already committed to work at Banana Republic on certain days. So then I went to Jason. I was like, I feel so bad. Oh my goodness. But Jason was cool. He was a good manager. He was really, really cool. But yeah. So I ended up going on the ship, doing the bookings. We did really well. The person I was working with, she was so cool. She was from South Africa. And her and the things that I learned working with her, just culturally, it was awesome. She was so awesome. And yeah, and the numbers were great. We did tons of bookings as well. And I got a free 2-week cruise, and my flight was free too, to Puerto Rico as well. I flew American Airlines at the time. So yeah, it was just amazing. But I will say that with this whole Crystal Cruises situation, that is crazy. And yeah, now people hopefully they'll be able to find another job. Maybe other cruise lines are hiring. I don't know what the climate is for other cruise lines. Maybe luxury cruise lines are hit a little bit harder than other cruise lines. Or maybe all the cruise lines have taken a huge hit. Who knows? Let me get back to this. Where was I at? Crew members, like our sail companies, are going to take care of blah, 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 blah. Yeah, Medina says the captain on board and all the other official crew members have been kind and have tried to ensure that passengers don't feel the effects of what's happening. Pace was hired to work with the Crystal Symphony until February 23rd. He says he's worried about the future of the crew who worked on the ship for years. They're really unhappy, Pace said. Their future is uncertain. This is their jobs. They've been on these ships for 10, 20 years, which is true. Because what they do, some people, for those who don't know how cruise ships work, usually, and I learned this on my little 2-week stint as well. What they'll usually do is like a contract where you'll have like 6 months on and then you'll have a few months off. And then you'll have, another 6 or 9 months on again, and then you'll have a few months off. And it does it like that. And the people who come from all of these other countries, it's usually the same thing where they're working on these cruise ships, making tips and stuff, and they send money back to their country in doing all of that. So it's really amazing when you think about it. And my heart does go out to these people too. As for the future of Crystal Cruises, cruise experts recommend you don't wait to hear from them, and you should try to seek a refund proactively through them or by calling your credit card company. You know what? If Crystal Cruises, and this is the end of the article, you can check out now if you want to. If Crystal Cruises is what they've always been, and yes, they filed bankruptcy, but Crystal Cruises is still Crystal Cruises. So obviously, yes, you would want to be proactive and check in with them. But I really believe that they would want to make this right. Don't forget, too, that just because a company files bankruptcy, that doesn't mean anything. If you go through a list of companies, if you were to look them up on the internet that filed bankruptcy and then they came back again, there are dozens of companies that have done this. And people are like, KC, why are you bringing that up? I'm bringing that up to make this point. Is that you don't want to tarnish your brand. Crystal Cruises has a brand. It's a reputation. Crystal Cruises is luxury. So could you imagine, okay, they file bankruptcy. They come out of bankruptcy. They decide to relaunch their Crystal Cruises cruise line with their ships and everything else, saying, hey, we restructured. We did everything we needed to do. We're back. We're better. Everything's good. But all of these guests, you never paid them back. You never refunded them. You never did this. You never did that. Then you don't want to carry that baggage onto the restructuring if you decide to relaunch Crystal Cruises. Now, could they relaunch under a different name? Yeah, they could do that, but If they don't, obviously you want to make sure you score as many points with your longtime customers as possible. And the way to do that is to make sure that they are compensated for their inconvenience, no matter what you have to do. Just throwing it out there. All right, so that's all I have for this. KIRWKC.com, main podcasting platform. This podcast is carried on Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Overcast, Bullhorn, Amazon Music, Audible, and several other podcasting platforms. Please feel free to listen to this podcast on whatever platform is most convenient for you. KIRWKC on all the social media platforms. Until next time, be blessed.